I felt it was a relatively difficult jigsaw puzzle.
比較的難しいジグソーパズルだと感じました。
I felt it was a relatively difficult jigsaw puzzle. She speaks relatively quickly.
彼女は比較的早口だ。
She speaks relatively quickly. Currency and bond markets are relatively calm.
通貨市場、債券市場は比較的落ち着いている。
Currency and bond markets are relatively calm. Buildings of national importance are relatively safe.
国が保存するほどの重要性を持った建物は比較的安全である。
Buildings of national importance are relatively safe. That area is relatively rich in natural resources.
その地域は鉱物資源が比較的豊かだ。
That area is relatively rich in natural resources. The province is relatively rich in mineral resources.
その州は鉱物資源が比較的豊富だ。
The province is relatively rich in mineral resources. The computer is a relatively recent invention.
コンピューターは比較的最近の発明品だ。
The computer is a relatively recent invention. This hotel is relatively expensive for this town.
このホテルはこの町にしては比較的高い。
This hotel is relatively expensive for this town. Milk has to be kept at a relatively low temperature.
牛乳は比較的低温で保存する必要がある。
Milk has to be kept at a relatively low temperature. The sales floor was relatively uncrowded.
売り場は比較的空いていました。
The sales floor was relatively uncrowded. That is relatively a little high.
それは少し割高です。
That is relatively a little high. This winter is relatively mild.
今年の冬は割と暖かい。
This winter is relatively mild. My car gets relatively poor mileage.
私の車はあまり燃費が良くない。
My car gets relatively poor mileage. It was hot today, but it was relatively dry.
今日は暑いけど割と乾燥していた。
It was hot today, but it was relatively dry. I am solving starting with the relatively easy problems.
私は比較的優しい問題から解決しています。
I am solving starting with the relatively easy problems. I was able to write a relatively long report.
私は比較的長い文章を書くことができた。
I was able to write a relatively long report. The metals fused at a relatively low temperature.
その金属は比較的低い温度で融解した。
The metals fused at a relatively low temperature.